and that is the prophet Elisha. He hardly ever gets mentioned or talked about, usually because people, if they're talking about a prophet in the Old Testament, they're talking about a guy named Elijah, which was his mentor and his partner, and did some pretty amazing and incredible things. But Elisha was no less faithful, no less God-centered, no less amazing. The text we're going to be looking at today is 2 Kings chapter 4. And what we're going to be looking at today, why I think it's so relevant for us, is the context of the passage we're in is about discouragement that comes from having a shortage. And every person I've ever known, including myself, at any point in time, we all know what it feels like to have a shortage in some area of life. Financial shortage maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's an emotional shortage. Like you feel like you got nothing left to give in any, like finding optimism or joy seems the hardest thing to do. Maybe it's relational joy. There's some relationships that have been fractured and cracked, or maybe even there's a canyon between you, and it doesn't feel like it's getting any closer, and it bothers you. There's a shortage there. But it can be occupational, it can be spiritual, where God just feels like this idea that's far, far away, and we sing to Him, and we talk about Him, but honestly, it feels like it's irrelevant and just something I can't touch. Everyone I know knows what a shortage feels like, and almost everyone I know knows what a shortage feels like that creates a discouragement because of the shortage. We're going to look at a family today that knows how this feels. So as we are thinking about it, I just want you to ask yourself, not if, the answer is not if, the answer is what? What is the shortage myself or my family is experiencing right now that either has us discouraged or borderline on it? What is our shortage? Let's look at 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 and meet this family. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves." And before we get any further, what I want you to see with this family, this is just a regular family. It's not royalty, it's just a regular family. And not only that, the crisis this family is in is a personal one. This is not a regional famine that's affecting a large group. This is a small problem to the small family. And what I mean by small problem, I mean it's not affecting other families. But it is affecting them. The shortage, I would say this family is feeling at this moment is a financial one, obviously with a creditor coming, but also an emotional shortage from the grief piling up from losing a loved one. That's the shortage I see happening. And as I look at this, I feel like I need to remind you something I was reminding myself as I was studying this. That, you know what? Life is hard no matter how spiritual you are, how faithful you are, how moral you are, how giving and sacrificial you are. It doesn't really matter. Life is always hard, isn't it? I don't know what you've experienced, but in my life, I have never seen tomorrow consult with yesterday to see what it should allow to happen to me. And what happened to this family is no difference. When it says a creditor is coming, in this culture, that means the bills and the debts have been piling up for a long, long time. This isn't just a reaction. This is a long problem that's been developing. And the only one in the home capable of having a job and making income is the father, and he passed away while the debts were still going. It's like the worst possible time for it to happen. And so when the creditor's coming, I want you to know this. Slavery in the Bible is not like the slavery we think of in America. It wasn't based on race and it wasn't based on anything like that. It's honestly indentured servitude. Because the creditors would give the family an option. According to the law, based on this debt that you cannot pay, either you come to jail or someone can come work off the debt. And obviously this family had agreed to the working off the debt, but it's still a bad thing. No one wants to send their kids to go be an indentured servant for whatever length of time to pay for debts. So it's a hard thing that they're going through. It's personal. And we never know the names of any of these family members. We never know the wife, the husband, or the two boys. We never know their names. But what I want you to hear before I go any further is God sees this family. God knows their name. And He's about to step into their personal situation in a way that is unpredictable and unforgettable. Verse 2. Elisha replied to her, "How can I help you?" Does that seem like a bad question to anybody else? It felt very clear from verse 1. If I came to you and said, creditors coming, bills have stacked up, my husband just died, and you look at me and said, "How may I help you?" I feel like you didn't hear anything I just said. The social cues should be pretty obvious here. But then he asks another question. What do you have in your house? Your servant has nothing there at all, she said, except a small jar of olive oil. When asked, don't miss this woman's instinct was to minimize what she did have. It was so small, it's not even worth mentioning. And this is normal. She's not a bad person. She's a normal person. This is how it is with all of us. Whenever we have a shortage in one area of life, it almost always causes us to miss a supply we have in another area of life. Having a shortage almost always causes us to miss a supply that we've got. We overlook what we have because we're obsessed with what we don't have. And this woman, rightfully so, is overwhelmed. So this small jar of olive oil isn't even worth mentioning. It's too small. But this small thing is the thing that God will use to change her life, change her family, and change the families of all those around her. The reason I'm telling you that is because of verse 3 that I want to read to you. Elisha said to her, "Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few." He's getting everybody involved in this because once they're involved in the process, they're going to be very interested in the outcome. So as I look at those first 3 verses and I get used to what's happening here, here are a couple questions that came to my mind that I am asking myself, and I want to join in asking you the same questions. Here's the first one. Where do I overlook what I do have because I am obsessed with what I don't have? Not do I do that. I'm starting with the assumption I'm like this woman in 2 Kings, and every one of us is. Where do I do this? When I'm experiencing a shortage somewhere, relational, emotional, educational, occupational, financial, wherever, where is it that I tend to overlook what I do have because I'm obsessed with what I don't have? And for me, it changes. It's not a consistent answer. I can tell you the one that I feel like God showed me as I answered that question myself. I have found, just in me, it is easy for me to moan and groan when somebody mistreats me, when someone ignores me, when somebody rejects me. Whether it's a person or a group, that has been me for as far back as I can remember. Man, it's easy for me to moan and groan when that happens. And miss the ways that same person or that same group actually appreciates me, actually respects me, actually likes me sometimes. But because I want it so bad, I tend to miss it when it's actually happening. And I have wrongfully, selfishly applied that to almost every group of people I've ever been around throughout my entire life. This is a big weakness of mine. When I have an emotional shortage, I tend to overlook the emotional supply I've got. It's there. It's always there. And it's not just always there for me, it's always there for you. But I act like this woman. I minimize what I got. That's the first question I'm asking myself. Here's the second one I want to ask you to join me in asking. What is my small jar of oil? What's mine? You asked, what's yours? What's the thing that's so small it's barely worth mentioning that God has given you? Is it some time you've got? Is it some toughness you have? Maybe it's some tenderness you possess. Maybe it's an idea that's been floating around in your mind back and forth, and it just seems so silly and so dumb. Maybe it's a prayer. I don't know. Is there something you've got that's so small it doesn't feel like it's worth mentioning? What is it for you? Now, I know that we don't normally participate as a church, but I'm going to urge you to work with me and participate on this. I'm going to say something, I'm going to ask you to repeat it, okay? Because I don't think I'm the only one that struggles overlooking things from obsessing with what I don't have. So here's what I want you to hear from me. Actually, I want you to hear it from God. I just want you to follow along with me. So to repeat after me. What I have is something. What I have is something. Okay, now that you know the words, now you can put some emotion and some conviction into it. What I have is something. We spend so much time comparing our worlds. We're looking at our pantry compared to someone else's pantry, and our jar of oil looks like nothing when you look at someone else's jar of oil. And that is not true. Maybe the jars aren't the same size, but what I have is something. It does count. What is my small jar of oil that I tend to completely miss this on? What's yours? What's mine? I've seen something that's starting to happen, and that's people going on vacations. Anyone else seen this lately? Thank you, Jace. I see a lot of people starting to go on vacations. I know this because I look at my device and scroll through, and hey, hello from Cabo San Lucas, and hey, hello from Disney World, and they're starting, and it's just going to increase throughout the year, the summer. Now, what's going to happen as you scroll through this? You're going to see pictures capturing wonderful moments. People having a great time, sharing great smiles, having some great food. Anyone seen those pictures? Right. And you're back here, they're in Cabo San Lucas, and you're just hoping to get to Chili's. That would feel great. And it's just easy to go, man, that would be nice. That would really be nice. When we compare our pantry to someone else's, that's what starts happening. Comparing always makes our something seem like nothing. Always. But here's what you miss with those pictures as you're scrolling through it. You don't miss the arguments that happened in the car for hours. You don't miss the stress that piled up from the flight delays. You don't see the stomach cramps that happened from eating that meal that was on the picture, and they spent the whole night and day in the bathroom right after that. You don't see the silent treatment that happened right before the smile and that happened for hours, maybe days after the smile. We don't see that stuff, do we? Nope. We just see the one moment and go, wow, I would like to have all of that. We don't see the size of the bill that comes at the end. We don't see the credit card debt piling up over and over and over to make memory after memory with the pressure upon pressure. We don't see that. We just look at one picture and go, my pantry's pretty small. Comparing is a deadly, deadly thing. It always makes our something seem like nothing. That's why I wanted you to repeat after me. Last time, what I have is something. Verse 4. Elisha continues his command, his instructions. He then says, then go out inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side." Now, there's something that stood out to me as I was reading this, because that sounds like something I've heard before from Jesus. When his disciples asked him to pray in Matthew 6, he said, "Go into a room, shut the door, and pray unheard words by anybody else, just to your Father, your heavenly Father." So when I see this here in 2 Kings, it sounds a lot like that. Shut the door behind you. I feel like the prophet is saying, you need to shut the door because it's just going to be you and God. This isn't for anybody else. You need to know that you matter, that you are seen, and something is about to happen just for you. Now, if God wanted to do this miracle of the oil multiplying in the town square or on her front porch, it would have wowed a crowd. Interesting story. When I was a young man in my 20s, I went to a state fair with a buddy of mine. We were walking through the demonstration building, and we happened upon a blender demonstration. When I say happened by, we were walking, we looked, and there was a guy with a microphone on a stage, and he had a block of wood you would find from your wood pile. He threw it in the blender, hit the button for 30 seconds tops, opened it up, poured sawdust out. My friend and I both had the same reaction. We looked at each other, we walked over to the demonstration. As soon as we walked up, the guy said, "Anybody here like juice?" Most of us went, "Yeah, we like juice." So he throws in whole oranges, whole strawberries, a watermelon with the green thing on it, a little bit of water, hits the button again for 30 seconds. He pours it in Dixie cups and passes it out to all of us. I got my cup of juice. It was like pink milk. There was not a leaf, there wasn't a seed, there wasn't anything in it. I am impressed. He then says, "Does anyone here like soup?" Now we're excited, so everyone goes, "Yeah, we like soup. It's the middle of July, but nobody cares. Yeah, we like soup." So he throws in a bunch of vegetables, a ton of water, hits the blender now for longer, like 3 minutes. When he opens up the lid, smoke comes out of the blender. He pours it in, and we get a portion of it, and it's not hot, but it's really warm. And the reason it's warm because the speed of the blades went so fast it heated up the liquid on the inside. Then he said, the last question, "Does anyone here like ice cream?" "Oh yeah, I mean we're holding up signs now for sure." So he throws in like 3/4 ice, a little bit of honey, some blueberries or whatever, hits the blender again for like 3 minutes, takes off the lid, holds it upside down, stuck inside. Takes a spatula, puts it in the cups, passes it around, it comes to me. It is like Dairy Queen soft serve ice cream. Then he says, "Anyone want to buy a blender?" They're $800. I didn't even have $8 to eat lunch that day. So I walked up to him and said, "Look, there's no way I can afford this blender, but here's what I want to know. How many people do I have to get to buy one before you'll give me one?" He thought, he said, "How about 10? I said, "Okay, 10 people come, mention my name, right? Here's my name, Flick. You don't even need a word, you just need a motion. They're going to come and say, 'Flick sent me.' They buy a blender, 10 of them buy it, you give me one. That's the deal." We shook hands, so I went and spent an hour roaming the demonstration building, inside and outside, trying to drum up business for this blender guy so I could walk home with one of these blenders. Only 2 people bought one from my recommendation. I did not get a blender, but it wasn't from a lack of effort. I told you that story because that's what I think of every time I think of this miracle. If this one would have been done outside, a guy wearing a microphone and on a stage, it would have wowed everybody around. But that's not what God wanted to happen. The prophet told her, "Go inside with your boys and shut the door. This is just for you." And don't you think she felt like $1 million when that oil starts pouring out? Like she's the only one that matters in that moment. Those were the instructions. Let's see what actually happened in verse 5. She left him, meaning Elisha, and shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another one." But he replied, "There is not a jar left." Then the oil stopped flowing. Now, God's the creator of the universe. He's made a habit of making something out of nothing. Could have closed the door, have all the empty jars on the counter, on the table, wherever they are, snap their fingers, and poof, they're all of a sudden full of oil. That could have been the miracle, but that's not how this one worked. The oil didn't grow until it flowed. The oil did not grow until it flowed. How many times am I pouting about my puny amounts I got rather than just giving what I got? And so that's kind of something that I see as I look at this and read it, is my tendency is I will give more to you, to anyone, when I get more. I'll give more money when I get more money. I'll give more time when I have more time. Does anybody else think like that? That's my tendency. I would argue it's probably humanity's tendency. I'll give more when I get more. What I want you to write down is God's tendency is different. If you haven't written anything down yet and you're into writing stuff down, or you're not, this is a good time to start. Please write God's tendency down. God's tendency is shortages grow when they're shared. Shortages grow when shared. Have you ever felt down, maybe depressed even? And in those moments, you have an option. You can sit and feel sorry for yourself, or you can encourage somebody else. Now, I don't know what's happened when you've done that experiment. I can tell you what's happened to me. When I spend time feeling sorry for myself, it only takes me down further and further. When I start twirling around the shortages I've got, it just makes me feel worse. But when I will make the motion, make the effort to pour out the little bit I got and encourage someone else, I'm not saying it takes me from depression to throwing a parade, but it lifts me a little. It gives me a little more hope, a little more joy, a little more optimism. Not when I'm feeling sorry for myself, but when I start pouring the little I got, because I believe shortages grow when they're shared. Now, here's the third and final question. How am I at doing this? How am I at sharing what I have while I wait for what I want? On a grading scale, 1 to 10, A to F, how am I at that? I know what I want. Oftentimes I have to wait for what I want. How good am I at giving what I got while I wait for what I want? How good am I at doing this? That's a hard thing to grade yourself on. Not because the answer is just hard to know that. For the last 12 years, my family has had no small amount of trauma and tragedy and stress. And there have been months, there have even been years where Brooke and I feel like we are on fumes. In all those categories I mentioned, relational, emotional, financial, occupational, spiritual, we're just on fumes. But because we believe that shortages grow when they're shared, here's what we've tried to do over those 12 years. We've tried to give some of it out. We've tried to serve somebody. We've tried to help somebody. We've tried to give something to somebody. We've tried to pray with somebody. We've tried to sit with somebody. We've tried clapping for somebody. Now, most of the time we do this, it's in the shadows. It's not on a stage. It's not on the spotlight. It's behind the scenes. So that's what we've tried to do. And I can tell you, out of 12 years of experience going through this, God has been true to himself and has constantly brought up our supply in every possible area. Because we've taken the little thing we got, an idea, a prayer, a handwritten note, something. and given it away and poured it out, and God has faithfully kept multiplying it again and again and again. Now, as I conclude, I just want to make one more mention about the jars. The jars that this family was supposed to go collect, there was only one requirement for the jars. They had to be what? Small, close, but not quite. Empty, they had to be empty. Right? Didn't care if it was skinny or wide, didn't care. Just make sure they're empty. To experience the transforming power that this family is going to experience of God's enormous love, all they need is one thing. Need. It's the same for us. To experience God's transforming love and grace in our life that doesn't just leave us where we are, but makes us new creations, new people where we have a different mindset, a different outlook, a different energy, a different filter. For that to happen, we only need one thing. Need. Now, if you just want goosebumps for a time or two, or a day or two, if you just want goosebumps, you don't need for goosebumps. But if you want transformation, you do. And because this woman came with need, I want you to see how God transformed her in the last verse of this passage, verse 7. She went and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left." Did God give her what she needed? Yes. Was it how she expected it? Not even close. The first thing he made her do was going around to a bunch of neighbors and facing the embarrassment she had on her shortage. That wasn't a mistake. And it wasn't just because that was the only way to get empty vessels. There's lots of ways to do that. But he had her and her boys go around knocking on doors, facing the embarrassment of what it feels like to have a shortage somewhere. She had to first be okay with not being okay. And then her small amount began to multiply. And this woman was only looking for some dough to pay the bills, but she got more than dough. She got dignity. She's the one going to sell the oil. You can't miss this. She's a woman in ancient culture. She has no ability to vote. She has no ability to have a job. She has no ability to own property. And she's the one doing business in a man's world, lifting her dignity. She got more than just dough. She got dignity. All she wanted was some silver, but God made sure she got the skills of negotiating and working on buying and selling so she could have something to not only sustain herself later, but to pass on to her boys. She knew what she wanted, and God gave it to her and a bunch of other stuff on top of it. But not until she was first okay not being okay. First, she had to pour it out. And I believe God is still doing this today. I believe He is still pouring His Spirit, His transforming Spirit into us and multiplying our small somethings into great things. I see it happening all the time. And the only thing God needs, the only thing we need for that to happen is need.